Okay, this is the video lecture, we'll call this part 1, on memory for Sissonville High School. And you have this PowerPoint. I have emailed it to you, so you should be able to print that off and take notes. If you don't have the packet, or if you can't print it off, you can still take notes, but it'll help to have that. So, we're now going to be talking about memory, and it's the next chapter in your textbook after we've talked about learning, so you'll hopefully want to read that. So what is memory? That's kind of what we're going to be dealing with today. Most of the terms that I'm talking about you will be able to find in your book, but some of them you won't. So it'll be really important to have good notes for this. So the first question I always ask class, my students in class about memory, what are some things that can improve memory? You guys are students, you have to study for a lot of tests, so surely you could come up with some ideas about things that can improve memory. We know for sure things like, believe it or not, rest, proper diet can increase or enhance memory, practice, and more specifically, spaced practice. In other words, if you're studying for an exam, it's better to not cram the night before, but to space it out over time. So those are 3 things right off the bat that we know can enhance memory. Lack of stress is another. And we'll talk about some more of these things as we go. And you could probably add to that list. So, what are some things that can get in the way of memory or diminish memory? It might be a little bit easier to think of these kinds of things. So again, we could probably easily make a list of things that can get in the way of memory. How about lack of the things that we just talked about? Lack of sleep. You ever been studying for an exam, you're trying to pull an all-nighter, and you're so tired the next day that you don't really recall the information that you need. Lack of proper exercise can also be a major factor in diminished memory. Stress. I should capitalize the R. There we go. Stress. You've had an argument with your boyfriend or girlfriend or your parents, or you've had an argument with a friend right before a test. Can that get in the way of memory or recalling things? I mean, certainly it can. Certain medications have been known to get in the way of remembering things as well. Any kind of brain trauma can also be a factor in why memory can be diminished. So again, these are some good things to kind of have written down in your notes. And we can, again, certainly add to that list if we wanted to. But that definitely gets us started. Okay. Now, information processing theory of memory. There are several different theories of memory. I'm not going to cover them all, but I do want to talk about a few, and I'm going to start here. Information processing theories of memory basically compare memory to a computer. You have 3 distinct processes. You have encoding, you have storage, and you have retrieval. Now, encoding by definition is simply how we take information in and how we change the form of that information. So that's your definition for encoding. You'll want to jot that down. Again, encoding refers to how we take information in and then change the form. If you're taking notes right now, you're taking information that I'm giving you and you're writing it down, or you're typing it into your computer. So you're taking that information in and you're changing the form of it into some form of written expression. Storage is the next step in information processing theory. With storage, you're basically filing away the information. It's just simply that, storage. Again, if you want to make the analogy to a computer, and this is our analogy here, when you store things away, you store it on a flash drive, at least I typically do. So that's where your information is stored. And then you have the retrieval process. Some people are really good at encoding. They're good at storing the information away, but when it comes time to retrieve, and by definition that simply means recalling information or bringing it back up into your working memory, that's maybe where some of the breakdown is. So again, retrieval is simply recalling information. So those are the 3 steps, and there can be breakdown in any of these steps. Sometimes if you're in class and the teacher is instructing, you're not paying attention or you're not motivated, those factors could impact encoding. Maybe the information never makes it into your short-term memory because you're just not paying attention. Or maybe it does. You encode it, you get it in your notes or you get it into your head, but then when you have to remember it later that night for a homework assignment, you can't. You don't, it just doesn't quite make its way into your long-term memory. So you have to call a friend and say, hey, what was Mr. Dean talking about in class today? I zoned out, or it didn't quite make it into my long-term memory. So there can be breakdown there as well. Or like I said, maybe you've got it for 2 or 3 weeks, but when it comes test time, it's difficult or impossible to retrieve that information. So again, breakdown at any of these stages can occur. Now, short-term memory by definition, and you'll want to write this down, short-term memory refers to information that you're thinking about currently. It refers to active, conscious knowledge. Again, short-term memory is, again, what you're thinking about right now, and it refers to active, conscious knowledge. So if I could survey your minds right now and get an idea of what is in your short-term memories, you might be thinking about dinner, or you might be thinking about church, or you might be thinking about what you're going to say to your parents or your boyfriends, or what you're going to wear. You may be thinking about several things at the same time, but it's what you're thinking about right now. And the magic number for short-term memory is 7. So write that down. 7 plus or minus 3. Studies show that most people with average memory capacity can remember 7 things at the same time, not much more than that. That's where the plus or minus 3 comes in. For those who are not quite as good at keeping information in short-term memory, it might be closer to 4 or 5 things. For those of you who are really good at remembering more things than 1 at the same time, maybe you can keep 9 or 10 things in your short-term memory at the same time. So that's where the plus or minus 3 comes in. There are 2 techniques to keep information in your short-term memory. And I want to talk about those 2 now. The first one is called rehearsal. Rehearsal, by definition, simply refers to repeating something over and over again. It can be verbally out loud, or it can be mentally to yourself. But it's repeating something over and over again to keep that information fresh in your short-term memory. And let me see if I can demonstrate for you real quick how that could work. Let's say you're out and you don't have a cell phone, you don't have anything to write on, and somebody gives you a cell phone number to remember. What do? Well, if you're like me, you say it to yourself over and over and over again until you can get to your phone and put it into your phone, or until you can get somewhere and actually write it down. So let's say somebody gives me the number, hey, Brandon, here's my number, call me, I gotta go, and I'm just gonna make a number up here, and they give me this number here. 415-6387. So I'm like, okay, so what do? I say it to myself over and over again. 415-6387. 415-6387. 415-6387. And hopefully that rehearsal will work, and I can keep it in my short-term memory until I can get somewhere to write it down or to key it into my telephone. So now the next thing I want to talk about, and then we'll wrap up short-term memory here shortly, is chunking. And I think your book talks about chunking as well. But chunking, by definition, refers to how we take large pieces of information and consolidate them into smaller pieces of information to remember. Okay, again, chunking. With chunking, we take large pieces of information and we consolidate them into smaller units of information. And it helps us to remember more effectively larger pieces of information. So let me see if I can give you an example of how that can work. Now again, the magic number for short-term memory is 7 plus or minus 3. Sometimes we have to try to remember things or numbers or units that are greater than 7. So let's just say hypothetically, try to get this where you can see it. This is a number that I have to remember. 10816408885. Well, that's a lot. I mean, I can rehearse that, but I'm probably going to forget it after the second time. So there's a couple ways I can do this. I can try to look at these numbers and break them down into smaller units instead of 10 units, because there are 10 numbers here. Maybe I can turn it into 4 or 5 pieces of information to remember. So the way that I do this, I'll show you how I can do this. All right, 1, 0, 10. 10 makes sense to me because 10 was my baseball jersey number when I played Little League Baseball. So that has personal meaning for me, so I can remember that. Now look at the next number in that series, which was an 8. Oh, okay. 8 was my basketball jersey number when I played Midget League Basketball. I don't know why I remember that, but I do. So that makes sense to me. Okay, very good. So I've got the 1, the 0, and the 8 taken care of. Now I can look at 16 and I can look at 40. Those numbers make sense to me because my daughter happens to be 16 years old. So I can remember those two numbers that way. Okay? And when I think about 40, well, it just so happens that's how old I am. So now I can remember those two numbers that way. Okay, then we have the last 3 digits here. So how can I remember that? Well, funny, because 885, 885. Oh, just so happens that my grandmother is 88 and a half years old. How about that? So that would be 88.5. Voila. So now, instead of 10 pieces of information to remember, I can just remember my jersey number from baseball, my jersey number from my basketball days, my daughter's age, my age, and my grandmother's age. Now, that seems like a lot of work to remember 10 digits, and it is, but it's easier to remember these 5 things as opposed to the 10 things. So that's what chunking is. And generally when we do this, when we chunk, we are doing this with numbers as opposed to facts. So it is a technique that can help keep that memory or those memories in short-term memory. So we'll go ahead and call that the end of the first part of the lecture on memory. Thanks.